Good.
Welcome to the webinar, everyone. My name is Jeremy Corrao, the Vice President of GrowGeneration's Commercial Division. Max Yield, Photos, and GrowGeneration appreciate your attendance. We all hope you enjoy this high-level deep dive into lighting. Today, we're proud to present the State of Lighting in Commercial Cannabis, a maximum yield webinar presented by Photos. The purpose of this webinar today is to help you understand lighting and why it is one of the most crucial aspects when choosing how you will cultivate. This is a tricky decision to navigate with products all over the board in efficiency, cost, and quality. We hope this webinar is an educational tool to achieve the same results as the professional guests that we have on the panel today. Just a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording as soon as we are able to do so. Please note, if there's enough time after the webinar, we will be asking questions to the panelists from the audience. Please type those questions in the Q&A box for after the presentation. Now, let's meet the guests. First, we have Kevin Kuethe, has been designing, building, and managing cultivation facilities around the United States for the past 10+ years, with a singular mission guiding him along the way: to create an indoor environment that so closely mimics the outdoors that the cannabis thrives as well, if not better than it does outside. He currently serves as Director of Cultivation for Lume Cannabis Company in Michigan, overseeing a facility licensed to grow 14,000 cannabis plants and is expected to quadruple its production with a facility expansion over the next 2 years. Kuethe's team is at the forefront of maximizing quality and output in high-intensity LED environments. Second, we have Dr. Bugbee. Dr. Bruce Bugbee is a professor at Utah State University and president of Apogee Instruments. He has collaborated with NASA for 40 years to design food production systems for people living on Mars in 2011. He was awarded the Governor's Medal for Science and was a fellow of both the American Society of Agronomy and the American Society of Horticulture. He has recorded multiple videos of photobiological principles. One video on cannabis has over 1 million views. Perhaps his pinnacle achievement summarizes everything he knows in a TED Talk entitled Turning Water into Food. And lastly, we have Mr. Stephen Cantwell. Stephen Cantwell is the founder and CEO of Green Life Productions in Nevada. 2 words immediately come to mind when talking about Green Life Productions: regenerative and sustainable GLP's state-of-the-art cultivation uses LEDs, rotates 3 rooms perpetually for 13 harvests annually, and is one of the only commercially regulated facilities using 100% living organic soil. By building out the facility in this way, GLP has created a living medium, ensuring the longevity of its plants. The soil is inoculated with organic microbial life, beneficial bacteria, and fungi living among the cannabis. Arthropods, nematodes, and ladybugs are just a few of the critters that make up the food web in GLP's no-till botanical garden. His methods have garnered a loyal following of cultivators online who admire his care and dedication to the cannabis plant. Now let's get right into this. I'm going to ask this question to each panelist. Question 1, Stephen, how long have you been working with the cannabis plant, and what was your original inspiration to get started?
Oh, Stephen, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I've actually been working with the cannabis plant longer than than I'm proud to admit, since I was a teenager. But after my UFC career, I was highly injured and had some long-term injuries to look forward to. So I wanted a more sustainable way to manage pain. So I was reintroduced to cannabis as a medicine, as a pain reliever. So I started that journey about, I want to say 11 years ago, 12 years ago, and just basically been going down that route pretty hard.
Thank you, Stephen. Kevin, how long have you been working with the cannabis plant, and what was your original inspiration to get started?
Yeah, I've been at it just over 10 years. You know, and my original, I guess, inlet into the industry was through a friend of mine, Matt Morgan, who we started a company in Arizona together called Lume, and that was really our first run at it. And we went from 3 of us to 120 employees in 6 months or something, and we're part of this just incredible growth rate. And at the same time, my stepfather had come down with stage 4 lung cancer. And, during the next few years, it was kind of a consistent daily hunt to try to find him something that would give him some relief besides the traditional opioids that they were trying to prescribe. They just really tore him down. So it wasn't until we found a really, really good cannabis tincture that solved almost all of his problems. It was heaven sent for him, and he was clear-headed and had an appetite. Pain was gone, and it was really a miracle to me to witness that. And that is really what started to propel me to want to succeed and make this a real career.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. And last, Dr. Bugbee, how about yourself?
Oh, I'll only admit to doing cannabis for the last few years, but the previous 50 years was graduate school and working on other crops like cannabis. So long time.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. Kevin, what is your primary cultivation style and how long have you been cultivating?
Well, I've been at it commercially for 10 years, and I have tried almost every style of cultivation that you can think of. I've tried almost every grow medium and nutrient regimen and different types of lights, and just really trial and error for myself. It's been a big piece of our, success has been to try everything ourselves, and not listening to so much to what other people are saying. But we had a large commercial facility and the ability to test things like nutrients and our own mediums and things like that. And what we ended with, and what I'm currently doing, is Rockwall. So we're hydroponic, and we're in 6-inch Rockwall cubes, and they start out in the 1.5 inches, and we root them and transplant them, and they finish their life in those 6-inch cubes, hydroponically drained away.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Stephen, how about you? What is your
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what is your primary cultivation style and how long have you been cultivating like this?
Yeah, so we use organic living soil, more of like an indoor no-till approach, where we're not mixing or disturbing our soil. I've been playing with this style for about 10 years now. I want to say about 10 years roughly, from the medical garden, home garden, and then about 6 years commercially at scale.
Kevin, Stephen, what are the benefits you see from this cultivation style?
I mean, for me, it's just a much more natural, easier way to grow. We're slowly starting to dial in some of the labor ends of it, so where the system really runs itself. Most of my employees are microbes and/or worms, arthropods, things of that nature. So it just drives labor costs down, makes a much more natural product, just more eco-friendly across the board. We're definitely causing less waste or creating less waste and trying to use as little energy as we can.
Perfect. Kevin, what are the benefits you see to your style?
Well, what we do is try to give the plant a perfect life, its entire life. And for us, that goes beyond just creating our own nutrients, which we do. We make all of our own nutrients from research or agricultural grade salts. But we take it a step further, and we'll actually do petiole tests and sap analysis of all of our leaves. We'll do each strain once a week, all the way through its entire life. And what we found is that, certain strains and certain genetics eat similar and drink similar. And so we'll group those together and give them their own special nutrient regimen. So every single week, they're optimal in all nutrients all the way through their life. It's a little bit harder to do. It's very difficult to do when you're hydroponic, because all you have is that little grow cube, and you have to make sure that you're hitting the exact right nutrients at the exact right time and everything that plant needs. So it is difficult to perfect and dial in, and it does take a lot of testing. But once you get that program on point and everything is in the optimal range the entire time, we've just been having absolutely stellar results. Stellar results. We're clearing 100 grams a foot, no problem. And the rooms just look fantastic. The plant health has been unreal, and and really monitoring that and doing your testing throughout its life and making sure you're giving it everything it needs is critical. You're not able to do that unless you do the correct testing.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Dr. Bugbee, your lecture entitled Cannabis Grow Lighting Myths and Facts has garnered over 1.7 million views in the past year. What inspired you to contribute such valuable content to the cannabis industry?
Oh, I guess that you're calling it valuable because a lot of people viewed it. But my job is teaching and education. I'm a professor at Utah State University. And so as such, we do videos on content. And that particular one, some of the other ones have had several 100,000 views, but that particular one got, well, I guess it's 1.7 million now. It wasn't, and some things go viral, some things don't. I mean, I don't know. We just recorded a lot of videos, educational videos that talk about the biological principles that we can apply to cannabis. So it's what inspired me to teach is probably a better question. And that was way back in my career. Took a position as, I guess at one time in my career, I was going to teach high school, and then I kept going, and now I teach college students. We're offering a class at Utah State University on the science and technology of cannabis cultivation. And in a few weeks, we're opening up an online class with that same title, Science and Technology of Cannabis Cultivation, to talk about the principles of plant science and the principles that guide us to optimize the crop. Like these guys are doing in the field, and we do it in much smaller scale in growth chambers.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. We appreciate all the hard work you do. So our first section is going to be adopting LED, where we'll explore all the panelists' histories and their journey to growing under LED, lessons they've learned along the way, and tips for how to evaluate LED grow lights. Starting with Dr. Bugbee, what are some of the most positive changes you've seen in the recent developments of LED technology to date?
Oh, I think I would summarize that by saying the price has come down and the durability, the quality has gone up. And both of those needed to happen over the past, just 5 to 10 years for LEDs to get increasingly cost competitive with double-ended high pressure sodium technology. So when we first started putting LEDs in, there was issues with the power supplies having issues, and now those are far more reliable. So price and quality are two big things. We understand spectra way better than we did even 5 years ago, and so manufacturers are able to dial in some more optimal spectra for the lights too.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. Mr. Kuethe, you've built the foundation of your career around HID lighting. What brought you around to LED?
Well, let's see. Back in my Arizona days, we had a light scientist come through with an LED veg light that he was preaching about, and my motto has always been, try it. I'll try it, see if it works. I'll test it myself in my environments and see what happens. Well, it just gave outstanding results on our veg plants. I mean, it was just outrageous. The nodal spacing was tighter, the plants grew more vigorously, the root zone development was much better. And to me, that kind of triggered something, because I knew immediately it took less energy, it produced less heat. And learning more and more about the technology, the farther I got through the industry, knowing that HID lighting is 50 or 60-year-old technology that everybody knows. We use those as street lamps outside, and it just doesn't make sense to me building these facilities with so much mechanical capabilities, really just to deal with heat from the HID lights. And to me, I knew that had to be something to change in the future. So my hunt started then, and I began to hunt down and find any grow lights that I possibly could, LED grow lights that I possibly could, to test run. My problem was that I was typically always getting similar results where the buds were larger and dense on the very top of the canopy, but everything else, it just wasn't getting the light penetration and wasn't able to produce the yield or the quality that we would require, you know. And to me, at that point in my career, I needed to find a light that I could feel comfortable taking down at an HID and swapping it with an LED, and the same thing would happen or better. Otherwise, I wasn't going to do it. So, you know, fast forward a couple of years, I was the chief operating officer of a publicly traded cannabis company, and we were test running LEDs at a really beautiful setup there. And I think I had gone through maybe a dozen LEDs all the way through flower. I typically would run them twice. You know, it's difficult to get one good read off cannabis. You know, you want to make sure that you give it a double run to see if there's anything there you missed. And, you know, I had a couple LEDs that were due decent. The yield got a little better, but it wasn't until I plugged in my the Photons light that I had tried. I think it was my 13th LED I had taken through flower. And my growers and myself were all kind of blown away because the result was a little better than we had from our HPS. And really that started me down the pathway. That was 4 years ago. That started me down the pathway. And now, you know, I've got almost 2,500 LED lights up right now in Michigan, and we're putting up another couple thousand here in the next year. So, you know, we found one that worked. There's definitely some nuances within switching to LEDs that you have to take into account as far as your mechanical capabilities and things like that. But it was pretty astonishing to see them and that light do such immaculate work, and the yields and quality we were producing. It was kind of a no-brainer to switch everything over. But that was really my first crack at testing LEDs, and I'm glad I did.
Thank you, Kevin. Stephen, to answer the same question, most of us all come from HID backgrounds. What made you make the jump from HID to LED? You're on mute. There. I think you're still on mute, Stephen. There you go.
So what caused us or what motivated us to switch over was when we first opened our facility in Nevada. It was highly regulated, and there was a lot of things changing, going from a small medical grow to a big commercial grow. One of the things was we undercalculated our HVAC, so we had to make a decision: do we want to go HID and double our HVAC system, or do we just want to spend the extra money and go LED and keep it you know, cut in half basically? So we rolled the dice and we went with LEDs, just knowing we didn't have to worry about changing bulbs or bulbs exploding or failures, things like that. So we made the decision 6 years ago to go commercially full LED. We started off with an old Illumitex light. Worked really well, but it was that old blurple spectrum that was really hard on the eyes, caused a lot of photo bleaching, things of that nature. But we were able to pull good yields off of them. So we were definitely believers in the technology. And then Photons brought their lights around and just kind of blew everything out of the water. And yeah, we haven't looked back since.
Going into the next question, what are two of the biggest things and changes that you've seen from going to LED to no-till soil?
From growing LED with no-till?
Yeah.
I mean, there hasn't been really any changes where, I mean, we're in the process of writing the book on indoor no-till living systems. But what we've kind of established is that LED fixtures indoors with no-till is definitely part of the recipe, part of the secret sauce, if you will. Whether it be just the more controllable heat, just all around softer nature of the light. They definitely work well with the no-till organic living soil systems.
Perfect. Both Kevin and Stephen, you know, both of you guys are growing two completely different opposite methods, but you guys are both using the same fixture. What were some of the key reasons you chose this fixture, and how has it helped you dial vastly into different methods?
Sure.
Starting with Stephen, please.
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so we chose the A3i obviously because it's just an awesome light. The ability to be able to control the spectrum and all those things just really put it at the top of my list. As far as our system versus say someone like Kevin's system, we're now that our light is no longer the limiting factor, our soil is. So I can only push my plants as hard as I can get my soil to cycle. Whereas Kevin, as you see behind him, he has some of the biggest colas I've ever seen. So he's obviously had his nutrient intake or uptake dialed in to where he can really maximize the potential of those lights. So it's really exciting to see the maximum potential, because I have a hard time getting colas the size of my head like he does. But again, that's just, it's a give and take with different styles,
Quality to quantity. And it goes both directions, I think. Kevin,
Yeah,
how about
100%.
you? What made you choose?
So like I had mentioned before, I knew that once I just saw that first veg plant grow under LED, I knew that was going to be something special, that was going to be part of the future. So I invested a lot of time finding LEDs and testing them side by side. And, like Steven said, the A3i kind of blows everything else out of the water yield quality wise, which is what I'm looking for. But, for us, the A3i has the ability to be digital and dimmable, so you can actually adjust the percentage of a light intensity as you want during any color spectrum that you want. So having the ability to manipulate the spectrum and the intensity, while you also have the ability to manipulate the environmental controls in the room and your nutrient recipe, like I do, you're able to achieve some really special things. I like to think of the cannabis plant as almost like like an athlete, and there's certain points during the race where that athlete can sprint if you let it, and other times where it's going to jog and get tired. But with the LED lights having the capability of having 2000 ppfd is a really astonishing amount of light for the cannabis plant to be able to take up. And if you listen to some of Dr. Bugbee's seminars that he's put on, you'll realize the cannabis plant can take that. That's what the sun gives outside, is close to 2000 ppfd, and the cannabis plant is capable of soaking that up if all the other elements are there. If you have enough nutrients to feed it, if there's enough evapotranspiration happening, enough moisture removal happening for the plant. One of the first things you notice is the plant's going to drink more because there's more light energy. It's going to uptake more nutrients. It's going to grow faster. And you have to have the mechanical capabilities to deal with that. So it's a good problem to have, but it's definitely very relevant.
Thank you, Kevin. Dr. Bugbee, frequently new folks getting into the business will design their facility first and then select their lights as an afterthought. Are there any pitfalls to this path towards controlled environment design? Dr. Bugbee, you're on mute, please.
Yep, happened to me too. I think as Kevin mentioned, and Stephen too, certainly the thermal heat load in the facility changes when you go to LEDs. You get maybe 50% less heat depending on the LED. So there's an example of, you want to design the facility with the HVAC system for the heat load you're going to have. And if you design for HID and then you put LEDs in, you'd have an over-designed facility. That's a specific example. So I might take a second. I see there's three questions in the question and answer. One of them specifically to me, but let's see. Oh, how about, I know cannabis can be pushed high in terms of light intensity. What's the light compensation point for cannabis? This question is likely from the light response curves in my videos. Cannabis is certainly a highlight crop. Everybody knows that, but there's an economic optimum, even though you could keep pushing it, probably past full sunlight. If you wanted to but the returns are diminishing. So the key is getting the optimal amount of light rather than the maximal amount of light. Other than a research exercise, you can waste a lot of money getting that final 1% in photosynthesis to keep increasing yield. But people do ask that a lot. Another question in that chat is about ceramic metal halide lights, which they're right in the middle between metal halide and high pressure sodium. They have a nice white light. They're great for merchandising because they have a super high color rendering index for showing colors. That does not make them better for plant growth, makes them better for the human eye. Ceramic metal halide and are intermediate in efficacy, micromoles of output per joule of input. So they're not really widely used because they're not nearly as efficient as LED lights. And I think people, many years ago, everybody said you want to use metal halide for veg and high pressure sodium for flowering. And as I asked people that, no one knew the principles behind that. They just said, this is what we always do. But metal halide has a very high fraction of blue photons, and blue photons keep plants compact. So probably maybe without knowing the background, people chose metal halide to keep the plants compact. And then after they started to flower, you can go to the more efficient high pressure sodium when they're not going to get so big and tall. So that's the principle that underlied using metal halide for veg and high pressure sodium for reproductive state. But now with LEDs, we could do the same thing. Just give them high blue to keep them short, and then go to something very efficient for flowering because plant shape isn't so important anymore.
Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. Kevin, in your experience, if you could give me 3 things when switching from high intensity LED lighting environments, what would be the top 3 things you would say?
You mean like a heads up to a grower who's about to switch to LED?
Yeah, what are 3 things if someone's switching to LED that you would tell them to watch out for?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, if you're getting a high intensity LED that's got a high PPFD, your plants are going to uptake more light energy and they're going to uptake more nutrients. So you're going to need to feed them more often. One of the first things I noticed is that I went from 2 feedings to 3 feedings to 4 feedings per day in my LED rooms, where my HID rooms were still just sitting at 2. I also noticed that the evapotranspiration rates just skyrocketed. And I had to have the ability to remove that moisture from the room, or the plants hit something that we like to call a humidity ceiling within the room, and they stop transpiring. That slows down the metabolic rate. They're not going to grow as fast. The buds are going to be as big, and our yields will go down. So, to me, one of the major issues was to make sure that I had the capability to get the moisture out of the room that the plant transpired. If you don't, it's not going to transpire as much, and like I said, it'll slow down the growth rates, and your quality and yield will go down as well. So having that is a major piece, because that typically comes in when you're building a facility to increase your mechanical capabilities. We all hate hanging extra dehumidifiers in our rooms. You see 6 or 8 or 10 Quest units in a room just to try to get the moisture out. Sometimes that can be frustrating. So making sure that you got a good mechanical engineer and you're dialing in that moisture removal content is absolutely critical. That will pay dividends on your yields at the end. And then the other major component to that, that we notice is they're uptaking more nutrients, they uptake more water, and they transpire more moisture. That's a major piece of being able to handle those 3 things. Well, that'll give you a jump start right away. But another really important factor to keep in mind that, besides not having to switch the bulbs out, which is so nice, the LEDs aren't just turn on and walk away and plug and play. You can do some dialing in with them. There is intensity that you can change, the actual spectrum of the light itself that you can change, which modes they're in. And when you decide to deploy those during your growth cycle can make a big difference. A lot of that has to do with what type of genetic you have, and the capabilities of your environmental controls themselves. But those are all critical key things that you're going to deal with when you're switching to a high intensity LED like that.
Thank you, Kevin. Stephen, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I kind of want to touch on a lot of the things you've actually talked about. I'll kind of wrap it up. One, if you're switching or designing a facility or redesigning a facility, you're going to have an issue with, like say it was originally designed for HDI or HID. The heat load of these lights are going to be quite less. And what that's also going to mean is that, remember, you're growing twice the plant, like Kevin said, you're uptaking twice the nutrients, twice the water, you're growing twice the plant. And the only thing that's not doubling is your heat load. And the reason I say that is because your ACs are dehumidifiers. And when you have 20 tons of AC running, you have 20 tons of dehumidification. When you cut that 20 tons of AC into 10, you just lost 10 tons of dehumidification as well as cooling. So that's something you have to take into consideration is to be able to handle that extra load of moisture and understanding where it's coming from. It's because you're not running your ACs as much is a big part of it. Yes, the plants are uptaking more. Yes, they're going to transpire more, but also you cut your dehumidification in half by turning your ACs off. Second to that would be your air temp. With LEDs versus HIDs, the HIDs tend to warm the leaf surface temp up more than the LEDs do. The LEDs, in order to get the leaf surface temperature where you want it, you have to raise your air temperature a little bit. So typically we used to run our rooms with HID around 78 degrees, give or take a couple degrees. With LED, you're going to want to run your rooms closer to like 81 to 83 is kind of my comfort zone. So that way you get more photosynthesis, but by doing that, by having the proper leaf surface temperature. Not only that, but your dehumidifiers actually run better the little bit warmer the rooms are. So that'll actually help you swallow a little bit more of that excess moisture that your plants are putting out. And also, like Kevin was saying, nutrients. You're gonna have to, if you're growing twice the plant, you're gonna have to feed it twice as much. And that's something that I let slip by. Is I was running the same system for over 4 years before switching to Phosse. So I quit. I fed my soil. I don't feed my plants. I feed my soil. I fed my soil the same as I did my old lights, and it eventually caught up to me. And then I had to really ramp up my feeding regimen for my microbes. But yeah, those three things are the things I look out the most.
Thank you. Appreciate all the info. Dr. Bugbee, the lighting industry is full of unscrupulous actors, giving rise to the popularity of institutions like the DLC, Design Light Consortium. But even they are not immune to distrust. Can you speak a bit about how LED shoppers can be better informed consumers?
Well, it's nice. It's good you mentioned the Design Light Consortium. As many people know, they started a long time ago for human lighting, and a lot of detailed analysis for architects for human lighting. And then they started doing some for horticultural lighting, and that expanded greatly. So the DLC is a great place to look at the efficacy of lights, and you can go to their website and sort by efficacy of lights. Now that is one criteria of lights, not all of them, but that's a pretty important criteria. They require third-party certification testing of that. It's interesting you mentioned they're not immune to distrust. I would wonder what people haven't liked about the DLC. Maybe it's because I don't know, not including the right wavelengths in their analyses, something like that. But back to this issue of selecting a light. Reputable companies are a big deal because they make quality lights that are going to work. I mean, there are some lights. Oh, take LEDs that don't have any protection below the LED. They can be a little higher efficacy, but geez, don't get them wet. Don't spray the light, and then all of a sudden you get water on the light, it shorts out, and boom, there your light's shot. That's an example of a difference in quality among fixture manufacturers. Is it just how they respond to moisture? And I do know a lot of growers have bought in lower cost LEDs, and then in a humid environment, they short out, the electronics short out.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. I'm going to move through these last two questions in this section pretty quickly. Stephen, you were running different LEDs. Were you ever running what they call blurple LEDs?
Yeah, I have probably more experience running blurple LEDs than anybody.
So
Yeah.
how has this light impacted, how has the cleaner light impacted your operations going from blurple to what you're doing now?
I mean, honestly, you see happier plants. I know I have a happier staff as well as myself. You can see the plants better without having to wear these gnarly green glasses that really kind of change your perspective. So the full spectrum light is much easier on the eyes. You can see it in the plants that they seem to enjoy it much more, less stress from them. But yeah, overall, game changer for sure.
Perfect. Mr. Kevin, one of the stickiest arguments against high intensity LED fixtures is the cost. In your experience, has this extra cost been worth it for you? And what did the ROI period look like?
Absolutely. Well, I just got to make one comment from what Dr. Bugbee said, is that the moisture and light issue from LEDs can be a serious problem with some of the cheaper LEDs. And I've seen that happen before. And that's one of the things that we thought was so cool about the Photosynthesis fixture is you can actually submerge that fixture underwater and it'll still work, you know, and we've had scenarios where they got wet and we needed them to work. And so I thought that was pretty spectacular.
I would agree. The IP rating is incredibly important in commercial cultivation to the LED.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But what was your question about? I've never run blurples.
Oh, you've no, not with blurples, but going to LED, you know, a lot of people, their determination is cost. You know,
Yes.
has cost affected
ROI, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the first thing that came to my mind was I don't have to buy bulbs anymore. That's, you know, depending on how much your bulbs are, that's $50 or $100 per bulb that you're swapping out every time they start to take a dive. And the problem with HID lights is when they dive pretty quick. And you see that in your yield immediately. Your yield will go down when that light intensity goes down. So, you know, that is a major component of your cost for that light. You know, you don't have to replace the bulbs on those. They've got a 50,000 hour life or something ridiculous like that. That lasts, you know, just forever. So that's a major piece of it. And then the second, of course, is the yield. You know, what we've seen is that it was a no-brainer to switch because our yield went way up. And anytime your yield goes way up, you're making more money. So we actually did an ROI on an 80 light LED room here, and it was about 18 months for us. 18 months.
Perfect. Thank you. Moving
now,
on.
I have to caveat that with, hey, there's a lot of variability. We're a vertically integrated company. So we grow it, we sell it, we do everything ourselves. The markets are different everywhere. The cost goes up and down for wholesale pounds everywhere. So to each their own, and every state is different. But for us, we had about an 18-month ROI.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate
Jeremy,
that.
Jeremy, you mentioned ingress IP rating just a minute ago.
Yep.
Let me tell people what that stands for, because not everybody is familiar with it. IP stands for ingress protection, and it's two numbers. And IP11 is really bad. I mean, the first number stands for dust protection, and the second number stands for moisture protection. So an IP11 would be not very good. If you sprayed it with water, it would short out. As the numbers get better, the protection for dust ingress and moisture ingress get better. So you get all the way up to IP, like for example, 55 is pretty good. And then you can get 57. And now some things are even 61. So the numbers get up in the 5s and 6s for lights that are exceptionally well sealed. And that's an international rating for the sealing of anything, lighting fixtures and anything. It might be an IP rating for a car, as far as I know. Drive your car through a car wash, don't get any water inside.
Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. Moving on to the second part of this panel, light levels, spectrums, yields, and harvest quality. We aim to dive deeper and to understand better the practices of our panelists currently employing and growing under LEDs. I will be starting with several questions for Dr. Bugbee. Dr. Bugbee, the standard for gauging the performance of grow lights has been ppf to measure their total output of PAR, as traditional defined. But a recent discovery coming out of your lab is around the concept of EPAR. Will you go into that a bit?
So first of all, PAR is photosynthetically active radiation, and ppf is photosynthetic photon flux. And these are the wavelengths of light that drive photosynthesis. What we found, and this is, by the way, is in collaboration with other colleagues too. It wasn't, all this work wasn't just done at my lab. A colleague, Mark Van Eersel at the University of Georgia, has also done a lot of work on this. Far red photons cause photosynthesis. And this is a big deal because there's a very efficient far red LED. And it peaks at 730 nanometers. And by the old definition of photosynthesis, this would do nothing for photosynthesis. But we have very clearly shown now that those photons cause photosynthesis. And we've written a bunch of papers. If you type my name on the internet and far red photosynthesis, you'll find the manuscripts we've written on if you want to really dig deep into it. But in short, we are now starting to count those photons as photosynthetic radiation. So we need a new name for this definition. And so we've been calling it EPAR, a lowercase e, and then PAR for extended PAR. And that term is catching on. My company, Apogee Instruments, makes a sensor that's an EPAR sensor. The big deal is it allows innovation among lighting manufacturers to put far red LEDs in their fixtures and be counted in the efficacy of the fixture. This is, by the way, one of the things that the DLC has been slow on. They haven't counted those photons in their ratings. And in my mind, that's been stifling innovation among LED manufacturers because they could work them into the fixture and take advantage of all the good things those far red photons can do.
Dr. Bugbee, I'm going to put kind of these next two questions together. What would be your ideal PPFD range for cannabis?
For the wavelength range for photosynthesis?
Correct.
I think, well, we're calling it 400 to 750. Now, there's also a powerful LED that's at 405, 402 nanometers, right on the edge of 400. And so we've studied that, and those photons are also photosynthetic. So we often call it 390 to 750, the full range, which includes photons right on the edge, which are a big deal because we have LEDs on the edges that we ought to be counting as photosynthetic.
With a lot of lights being in this 631 watt range, roughly around 1700 ppf, what do you think is too much light for cannabis? And what do you think is too little?
That's an economic choice. I can tell you the response curve, but as a ballpark, I'm going to say 1,000 micromoles per meter squared per second. But it depends on the value of your real estate, the cost of your electricity. There's a lot of inputs in this. And then Kevin and Stephen can say, well, we've run the numbers. We pay this for electricity. The fixtures cost this much. Our product is worth this much. That's something that a good business person runs the numbers on. But I'm going to say it's in the ballpark of 1,000 micromoles per meter squared per second for a very high value, high input crop.
Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. Kevin, have you been able to provide more light without burning or stressing the plants, getting your levels to extremely high?
Yeah, it's for us. We're pioneering the industry as we go here. We're still all in the infancy stages, so we have to try. It's trial and error. We have to test run this. A lot of it's common sense. We have our power meters. We can see what the light's at with different intensities and different spectrums, and make sure that we're not doing anything too crazy to the plant, and that we're easing everything to the next level smoothly rather than taking big jumps. Doing that is really been beneficial to us. We've learned a lot. So in order to, Steve touched on this earlier as well, when you're giving the plant more light energy like that, it's going to require more nutrients. And if you don't provide it with what it needs, you can get some of those negative results like burning and things like that. So in reality, if you dial in all of the other components that kind of play a role for that plant's life, to what's happening from the light, you can get extreme results. And that's really what our goal has been, is to find the best combination of everything to meet that light energy intensity, to have that plant react the best way that we possibly can. The one thing that we didn't mention was the lensing. The lensing on LEDs has changed a lot in the last few years, and it's made a major difference on how they're accepted into the plant and how it throws the spectrum and where the light spreads and all of that. The lensing has been absolutely a critical piece for us as well.
Thank you, Kevin. Stephen, a lot of you guys have reported higher terpene levels and cannabinoid levels. Switching to LED, you guys are both running Phosse LEDs. Can you share some of that data with the audience, starting with Stephen?
I don't have any of it in front of me, so I don't want to misquote anything. But yeah, for the most part, we've sustained from our old LEDs to our new LED, we've sustained the same levels, if not greater levels of terpenes and cannabinoids. And what's cool about that is we managed to almost double our yields. So the fact that we're able to double the biomass of the plant and still produce it, keep up with the same amount of cannabinoids and terpenes, I think it's pretty impressive. I thought maybe by doubling the yields, we would see a drop in overall cannabinoid production as far as percentage goes. But no, it's kept up with the biomass. And yeah, it's been pretty awesome. I think the LEDs overall are going to grow a little higher quality bud just because of the lower leaf surface temperatures, the less extreme environments caused by them. You don't have as many hot spots and things like that can cause issues. So yeah, I think overall LEDs in general are going to create a much smoother product.
Kevin, you want to elaborate on that?
Absolutely, yeah. We're big data nerds, so we try to collect every possible piece of data we can and try to have it help make us some better decisions. In our experience, all that data that we've aggregated on average were 3% higher on total cannabinoids with the LEDs, which are actual percentage points, not just a factor of 3%. So like a 20% strain would get 23 in the LED room. Some strains have gotten as high as an 8% average, depending on the genetic. And I think a lot of that just depends on the genome itself and some of the lineage, what light intensity it could take and what environment it would thrive in. But we have seen a little increase in both. And then, like Steve said, you gotta factor in for that massive yield increase. That's just the mic drop right there, kind of. That's the game changer. And if you're still able to maintain that quality level, it's a huge win for us.
Thank you, Kevin. Dr. Bugbee, can you elaborate on terpene production under LED? And have you done any research around this subject?
We haven't yet done terpenes. We've done a lot of work on cannabinoids. And so I'm going to talk about those together. They're both secondary metabolites that the plant makes theoretically to make it more resistant to insects and diseases. As a general rule, we have not found as big a changes in secondary metabolites as one might think from spectral changes, just spectral changes. We just published a paper. It's in the journal PLOS1, Public Library of Science. And again, you can find the paper if you type my name and cannabis, it'll probably show up in a search. But in that paper, we tested 5 different spectra, and there was no effect on cannabinoid production. Now, this means THC and CBD production. There's lots of interest in this and speculation. But our job is to see if we can confirm it in controlled studies in the laboratory. So as a short answer, we don't have any evidence yet that changes in spectra enhance terpenes, but it's possible that they will.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. Continuing on with Dr. Bugbee, if you could have the most ideal variable spectrum light fixture, what would it look like, and what spectrums would it be able to alter?
Following up on what I just said about the PLOS1 paper, amazingly enough, in that study, the spectra that gave the highest yield per photon was high pressure sodium. And it's because it's a low blue that only has 4% blue photons. And we know that blue photons are not used as efficiently in photosynthesis as, for example, red and other colors. And we didn't recommend high pressure sodium lights per se, but we did recommend a low blue spectra in lights. Now, that's for photosynthesis for sure. Lower blue and higher red, which many manufacturers are using in their fixtures. The challenge for that is that low blue can result in taller plants. So it's a tricky balance between manipulating plant shape and maximizing photosynthesis. It's possible that a fine spectra would be higher blue and younger plants to keep them compact and then go to a higher red later. The same way we were doing with metal halide and high pressure sodium years ago, only now we do that same thing more efficiently with light emitting diodes.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. One last question. Where do you think UV comes into the spectrum, and how will it benefit moving into the future?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
UV. Yeah, we've done a fair number of studies on UV. We were hoping to find we could increase cannabinoids. You don't want to say hoping as a scientist, you don't want to bias your experiments, but we hypothesized that we would see higher cannabinoids with UV lights. So far, we've not been able to show that in spite of multiple studies at different wavelengths. We gotten pretty good at burning plants with UV, and it's tricky. You can turn them on for 2 hours a day, 10 hours a day. The wavelength matters. So UV, so far we don't have any evidence that we can increase cannabinoids with UV, but some UV photons can be really useful for disease control. That's an emerging principle. And boy, you can kill spores in a few seconds with UVC photons. So I think there's a lot of potential to selectively use UV to get desirable results, but those photons are very powerful. And the analogy I use for people is like humans. We got everybody putting sunscreen on in North America, and now guess what? Our incidence of vitamin D deficiency has gone up. Too much sunscreen. The moral of the story is some UV is good for you. And I think that's true of plants too. Some UV is good for plants, just at the right time in the right dose.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. Stephen, in the past few years, you released a product in the Nevada dispensaries called Bottom Buds. Most growers would be envious of the quality of these bottom buds, including, is there any correlation between the particular product and the changes you've made to your lighting system to produce a better product in this bottom bud category?
So yeah, we try to find creative ways to use 100% of the plant. We only have a cultivation license in Nevada, so we can't really do anything with production as far as vape pens, oils, cooking, things like that. At the same time, I'm trying to put out a high quality product. I don't want to put a bunch of shake. So we break our flower or our plant into three categories mainly. We have a baker's batch, which is just our shake, our sugar leaf. We have our bottom buds, which is our lower buds. And then we have our top premium nugs. Typically our bottom buds used to go to pre-roll. But then when we switched to Photos, we had such an increase across the board. We didn't want to keep pre-rolling everything. Then COVID hit and people weren't buying pre-rolls because they had time to roll their own joints. So we took this high quality bottom bud material, we pivoted it and put it into a jar and just called it what it was. It's bottom buds. They're nice, really high quality little buds. They're super tasty because they're kind of shade grown, not getting so much high intensity light. So they tend to be a little tastier. And we were able to sell them for a slightly cheaper price. So people enjoy it.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen. Kevin, would you like to say anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of tail off of what I was mentioning earlier with that light, where you get with my traditional LEDs I was testing, I wasn't getting good density. I wasn't able to get good canopy penetration with the light. And typically only the top of the canopy was really producing for me. That was one of the first things we noticed with the Photos lights is all of our bottom buds were actually buds. And they're still packageable flower. They weren't larvae. We didn't have to shred them into pre-rolls. They were like Steve said, they were buds that you don't want to grind up. So we definitely noticed that, and you're going to notice that with an increase. And just to touch on the terpene thing as well, terpenes are obviously extremely heat volatile, right? And a lot of terpenes will burn off at 70 or 80 or 90 degrees, and the light intensity those HIDs will put off is 600-700 degrees. If you get your hand next to it, you're going to burn your hand. The LEDs, you can grab the light, and just that speaks volumes with the terpenes you're preserving within the plant. That's why we like to cure it at low, cool temperatures. We don't want any terpenes to burn off. We want that to have a slow and even cure as well. But yeah, that's definitely a noticeable factor when we switched over to LEDs. You're getting more yield and you're getting light penetration to the bottom of your canopy, and so your lower buds are real flower. It's real buds, and it's not a product you need to grind up, and they're not larvae. So we notice the same success.
Kevin, with growing with the Photos A3i, what is the typical yield per square foot that you're seeing, and how many watts per square foot are you running?
Well, the cool thing about the Photos lights is that they're dimmable, right? You can adjust the light intensity, and they're 1500 watt fixtures at full juice. But and a normal grower would say, well, my HIDs are 1000 watts. How's that make sense? Well, you don't start them out at 100%. You start them out at 30 or 40%. You climb your way to the top. And really, at the end of the day, you're still not using as much as 1000 watt HPS. You're using actually less. I think it's closer to 800 or something when you average it out from that slow increase. So, that is a major component to that end result right there, is having that variability and control over the light intensity for your canopy. That big, really contributing factor only makes sense when everything else is tuned. That's kind of why I touched on the environmental controls, your ability to remove moisture, and increasing feedings and things like that, because it's not just as easy as swapping a light out. You do have to adjust to that, but the juice is worth the squeeze.
Thank you, Kevin. Stephen, how about you? What's the typical yield per square foot that you're seeing, and the watts per square foot?
I mean, it's hard to say. Obviously, we're running a lot of different cultivars, and then the watts are even trickier to say because when you're dimming it, you're not exactly 100% sure how much watts you're throwing down per se. But on average, our higher yielding strains, the ones I want to brag about, typically yield about 7 pounds per bed. That's about 3.5 pounds per 4x4, which is just under 100 grams per square foot, about 99 point whatever. And those are the higher yielding ones that we work with.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen. We're getting into the last of our time here, so I'm going to run through the future of lighting questions pretty quickly. Dr. Bugbee, are there any research projects you've been eager to see come out of cannabis industry and even participate in yourself?
Boy, that's a good question. We get dozens of people every week emailing me with their questions. And even as we speak here, I'm seeing there's now 13 questions in that Q and answer. So the questions come pouring in. And the key in a research laboratory is choosing the most significant questions for our next line of research. We have something like 40 growth chambers in my laboratory, so we can test a lot of hypotheses, and the key questions change all the time. But as a broad principle, we got to where we are in United States agriculture and world agriculture by genetics and environment, which means plant breeding changes and environmental changes. We're talking about environmental changes here, which are half of the equation. When the genetics really gets cranking, we're going to have a powerful tool for cannabis, new cultivars, and new environments to grow them. And so much of our work is studying genetic by environment interactions. How do cultivars react in different environments? So, but I don't know that I could say, a specific question that's critical. There's really more like the top 10 questions that are critical. One, for example, is pruning. I mean, just how much to prune and when. And I'm a big fan of the less pruning is good, but not everybody agrees with that. And there's a wide range of people doing different amounts of pruning of these plants.
Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. Do you hope that there's any advancements in LED technology, or what do you think the biggest advancement in technology will be in LED?
High efficacy and low cost. Those are two fundamental things. Those are hard to do for manufacturers. But as those two things happen, the lighting gets more broadly adapted. Here's an example. Red LEDs, just pure red, cost 5 times more than white LEDs. This is for a manufacturer to buy the chips. 5 times more for red. It's not because they're harder to make for a manufacturer, it's because we're not selling billions of them to the world, because red LEDs are almost exclusively used in horticulture. Red LEDs are used in the tail lights of cars, and that helps drive their costs down. But as we start using more red LEDs in horticulture, their cost will drop too, down around the cost of white LEDs. So I think we can look forward to better products and lower cost and much wider adoption by all kinds of people, not just cannabis, but people growing lettuce.
Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. At this time, our webinar is concluded, but I wanted to open it up to some questions from the panelists and to the panelists from the audience. I'm going to pick some in the chat. So, Dr. Bugbee, what is the LED light that is very efficient that's producing far red light? Curious if there was a specific brand that you would recommend in this spectrum.
Yep. First of all, the people that make the chips are not the same as the people that make the fixtures. Multiple companies make far red chips, LEDs, and they're all good. And then manufacturers buy from those companies and implement them into their fixtures. I mean, for example, Osram in Germany is a very big LED manufacturer. Lume LEDs is the biggest manufacturer in the United States. They're also an excellent chip manufacturer. Nichia in Japan is an excellent manufacturer of white LEDs. There's some Samsung in South Korea. And then we sort of broadly talk about China Inc., meaning a whole bunch of Chinese companies making LEDs too. So these are the people making the chips that manufacturers weave into their fixtures. But the quick answer is multiple companies make far red LEDs and multiple manufacturers are putting them in their fixtures.
Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. I think this is going to be the last question. And for a grower using LED, should they consider supplementing with UV panels during veg and far red panels during flower? I think Dr. Bugbee, you would be the best to answer this.
All I can talk about is our experience. Down to the violet LED, those are all good. UV LEDs just need to be used selectively and with caution. We don't have any evidence that their general use is beneficial, except for disease control. And far red can help with the shape of plants. If you get plants more far red, they're going to get bigger and broader, capture fill in between the plants faster. So again, far red photons are a very powerful tool that should be used selectively. Generally, too much far red, you get too tall of a plant. So you have to be careful not to overuse them.
Thank you, Dr. Bugbee. At this time, Kevin, Stephen, Dr. Bugbee, we'd like to thank you for being here with all of these questions and taking your time out of your day to help the world just create a better decision and really help understand their choices and moving forward with their cultivation styles, LED technology, and just really picking out how they're going to do this in the future. So from us at Maximum Yield, Phosse, and GrowGeneration, we would like to thank everyone for attending today. We hope this was a glimpse into the future of lighting and helping you best decide how to choose lighting in your future projects. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a link to the recording shortly. If you have any further questions in the meantime, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us through webmaster@maximumyield.com. It would also be great. Thank you, everyone, and we appreciate all of your time.
Thanks, guys.
I know.